Here's what we know so far. The first, Russian troops still poised near the Ukraine's border. Russia is risking military tension to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO. US is involved the situation to prevent Russia move forward. So US and Russia meeting concluded without any negotiation. So energy market still having a lots of volatility. So first, could you explain the economical background of the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Sure. So, the roots of the Russia-Ukraine conflict go back very far, far beyond the immediate circumstances. But in terms of sort of economics in the broadest sense, there is a dispute over the future direction of Ukraine. Russia prefers that Ukraine stays firmly in its orbit, in its sphere of influence, both in terms of security and in terms of economics. The most profound entanglements between Russia and Ukraine have traditionally been energy. And that's been where there's the area in which there's been a lot of disputes over the past several decades. Even in the 1990s, there were constant pricing disputes back and forth between Russia and Ukraine in terms of gas sales and transit. And that sort of continued to this day. Of course, after Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, that relationship broke down pretty severely, with Ukraine, actually stopping buying Russian gas directly. However, Ukraine still does get its gas supply indirectly through Russia. So there still are a lot of entanglements sort of in terms of energy. And of course, Ukraine remains a critical transit component of Russian gas towards European markets. And that's sort of where we get the conflict over Nord Stream 2. Which is Russia's pipeline project linking Russia directly to German consumers with the aim of cutting Ukraine out of the gas transit game sort of altogether within the next several years. So that's sort of the broadest dispute, is that Russia, prefers that Ukraine stay within its orbit in terms of security and economics. And of course, the West and Ukraine wants to have a little bit more flexibility in terms of its priorities, in terms of whether it wants to have closer ties with the West, whether that means, participation in NATO or the EU.
Okay, so do you think there are still remaining possibility of hiking the tension between Russia and Ukraine? What scenarios can be happened and what's most able to be happened?
And I think that Putin himself, if we look at sort of what's been said in the last few days, has probably not made up his mind yet about what he wants to do. There are several options in terms of Russian invasion of Ukraine, whether that means, sort of continuing by supporting insurgencies in the east and sort of just keeping Ukraine in an unstable state. There's the option of sort of annexation of the eastern provinces. And of course, there is the possibility that Russia invades Kiev and takes over Ukraine entirely, right? On the other hand, there is still a chance that perhaps this could be an off-ramp and there could be some sort of agreement which prevents Russia from invading. We just don't know. I don't know if Putin has even made up his mind yet. And I think it's pretty unclear even to negotiators in Europe right now what's going to happen. We don't know whether Russia is genuinely seeking a diplomatic solution to the conflict or just wants to use failed negotiations to justify a military attack. It's my own interpretation that, Moscow was looking to see how much these potential negotiations could actually address their very serious strategic security demands. Russia, of course, is looking for legally binding security guarantees, but understands that the West is very unlikely to grant them. There's a really profound disagreement over the state of European security. This actually goes sort of beyond Ukraine, right? Moscow views the current state of European security as unacceptable and dangerous to Moscow, and that potential Ukrainian membership, particularly in NATO, which it views as an enemy military alliance, is an existential security threat to Russia. So again, it's too early to say whether Russia will retreat from the border or invade. But if Russia cannot get at least the guarantee of a neutral Ukraine or Ukraine under Russian control, then it will be forced to block the outcomes that it does not want. either by force or by continuing the threat of force, right, to compel the West to sort of minimize its commitment to Ukraine as much as possible, right? And actually, Russia's annexation of Crimea was a pretty successful example of that strategy.
Okay, but still, Russia-Ukraine conflict also have made a volatility in energy market. May I ask your opinion? How will energy market move with this situation?
Sure. So, I mean, this is kind of the worst possible time this could happen because energy markets are already volatile, even taking into account the Russia-Ukraine conflict. As you know, Europe is in a major energy crisis this winter. Gas supplies are low, storage facilities are extremely low, and we've had actually some of the highest prices on record in natural gas all sort of throughout this past fall. The sort of main energy impact that I think is on everyone's lips right now is, of course, what will happen to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, right? Which is, of course, the pipeline that links Russia directly to Germany, a secondary tranche of that linkage to the pipeline. And the main energy impact on markets of sort of if there was to be a Ukraine conflict, if Russia did invade, would be increased pressure to cancel the certification of the Nord Stream 2 project, right? So this is very complicated, of course, because the new German government broadly supports Nord Stream 2. It argues that the project is complete, needs to move beyond it and get this started. And of course, the project is complete. It just sort of is kind of tangled up right now in the German regulatory process. So canceling Nord Stream 2, though, would be pretty complicated because it needs to take into account that if there was to be a military escalation in Ukraine, that might also mean the removal or the reduction of current Ukrainian gas transit capacity. So this could potentially mean both losing Nord Stream 2 and current Ukrainian gas transit capacity. So Germany would then have Nord Stream 1 and the Yamal pipeline, but what about other European consumers? Where would they get their gas? So that could cause actually additional instability and more problems for the European gas market, which is already extremely tight. Right now, European gas traders are relying on stockpiles to supply Europe and to avoid paying high prices. So European consumers and buyers either have the choice of drawing gas from storage or liquefied natural gas, or asking Gazprom to make new contracts or amend current contracts for more volumes. So that probably wouldn't change too much if there's a conflict. Perhaps the only thing that would change is that it might unite Europe around a common strategy about making decisions for its own energy security, which so far it's been reluctant to do because European states have very, very different energy interests. So that's sort of the main an initial fallout of a potential conflict. Of course, we don't know what will happen, and these kind of shocks would reverberate sort of broadly even outside of Europe. You know, for example, the U.S. actually imports Russian oil. Russia is the third largest supplier of oil directly to the United States. So, you know, if Russia was to directly sanction, I mean, if the U.S. was to directly sanction Russian oil imports, that would cause a lot of instability within the U.S. markets. I have not heard talk about that yet, but of course that is a potential option if Russia, you know, does the most extreme thing, which is to say, you know, take over Kiev and take over the country entirely.
Okay, and let me ask this last thing. What is the key factor to lower uncertainty of energy market driven by Russian-Ukraine conflict?
I think there's just so much uncertainty in the market in general, right? We're seeing uncertainty in Kazakhstan over the unrest there. That's causing some reverberations throughout energy markets. And of course, the specter of a major war in Europe is going to cause major instability to the world energy market. I think everybody's waiting at the edge of their seats right now to sort of understand what the direction of this conflict will be. Because if we do have a conflict in Ukraine, this is going to be a long, drawn out and complicated conflict. The U.S. has already sort of outlined its strategy, its porcupine strategy about making Ukraine hard to swallow, supporting an insurgency. This all points to a long, drawn-out conflict, which is not good for energy markets, particularly right now with such a tight oil and gas market and in LNG. Europe is already struggling to find competitively priced oil and natural gas that's being siphoned away to Asian markets. And if there were to be any restrictions on the gas transit going through Ukraine and then potentially cutting off Nord Stream 2, this would just raise prices even further. So we'd see increased prices in LNG, spot prices would be through the roof, and there'd be really big competition throughout the markets that rely on LNG and spot market gas for to find that gas. And it would mean a lot of prices. It would mean probably utilities, energy intensive industries would have to ramp down production. It would be pretty bad, particularly for the Europeans.
Thank you for today. It was really great time to hear your point of view about the energy market and the Russia and Ukraine the conflict. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.